Meeting to order, and if you're able, would you please rise and sing our national anthem? O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. We would like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa of the Three Fires Confederacy. Are there any, I have a motion to approve this agenda. Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Andrews, all in favor? Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we would like to move on to presentations, petitions, and delegations. We have a delegation. Mr. Craig Campbell. He's not, I'm sorry.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, the delegate is not unable to attend, so he did submit correspondence in lieu of his attendance. So if you could just acknowledge receipt of that particular correspondence.
Okay, very good. So, may I have a motion to receive this correspondence? Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Peters. All in favor? Thank you very much. All right, now we're on to topic of this evening, which is our operating budget. We have presentations. Mr. Brennan, did you want to comment before that we get started, or it's direct to our treasurer? Okay, Ms. Saeed, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through Your Worship to Council, welcome to 2020 budget presentation. We continue our presentation tonight with operating. So let's take a quick look at our agenda. It was very similar to what we did last night. We'll start with our consolidated budget impact, essentially the net levy requirement for 2020. So I'll be interchangeably using budget impact and net levy. We'll present administration, followed by Orangeville Police Services, Corporate Services, Community Services, and the presentation will be wrapped up by Infrastructure Services operating budget. As Council is already aware, on November 11th, we tabled our budget at 1.50 net of growth. Before growth, we were looking at 2.85%. Growth numbers came in at 1.35, and therefore the net levy requirement for 2020 after growth stands at 1.50. So let's look at that net levy requirement from a different perspective. In 2019, the town of Orangeville required a net levy requirement a little over $35 million. So how did we arrive to the $36 million that we are proposing for 2020? Okay, thank you. So 2020 one-time reversal is $90,000. Our inflationary impact for 2020 is $67,000, which is essentially the COLA impact. Previously endorsed items total to $133,000. One-time items total to $387,000. Service level impact, which is essentially FTA request, is $380,000. You will see more of that at different divisional level as we proceed through the rest of the presentation tonight. And operating impact of capital is $136,000, of which $102,000 corresponds to new loan for the fire station. So that's how we arrive from $35 million approved 2019 net levy requirement to 2020 proposed net levy requirement of $36 million. So the pie chart in front of you represents net levy requirement by division. Again, the bigger slices of the pie belong to police at 23%, fire at 10%, public works at 13%, corporate allocation at 18%. Some of the minor numbers are library at 5%, facilities at 6%, transportation at 1%, and so on and so forth. So this is essentially a good representation of levy requirement by different division. The table in front of you sort of represents levy increase percentage and its corresponding dollar value. So for every 1% of levy increase, you're looking at $366,000. So what does that mean in terms of tax bill or tax rate? So we are proposing a 1.50 levy increase. So for a median residential assessment, which is essentially the baseline, so a median residential assessment will likely see a reduction for the town's portion of the tax bill proportionate to their assessment increase. And of course, this doesn't account for any levy impact from the county as well as the school board. So let's look into some of the divisional budgets. So on the administration side, what we did, we lumped 4 different divisions together under administration: council, committee, CEO's department or division, and corporate allocation. So the biggest story here is the 44% reduction in CEO's office, and the material drivers for that is essentially the reallocation of GM corporate services position as well as the procurement position to corporate services. Originally in the 2019 budget, it was with the CEO's office. So that is essentially the biggest driver of that 44% decrease. So we move on to Orangeville Police Services. Again, they're looking at a 2.36% increase. In 2019, the net levy requirement was 8.1 mil. In 2020, the proposed levy requirement is a little over 8.2 million. And some of the key drivers or material drivers driving that number includes reduction in records check revenue, reduction in grants, as well as on the expense side, reduction in salary envelope. Council will note that even though there is reduction in salary envelope, but it's not enough to recoup all the reductions in revenue, and that is what's driving up the 2.36% increase. So that sort of concludes some of my slides. So at this point in time, I would ask GM McKinney to go over her slides, please.
Thank you. So corporate services is the team that supports the whole team. So the activities and services delivered by the town are at one point or another supported by corporate services, and it effectively transcends the organization. So we need to be effective to support the rest of the departments and division in being effective. Before I start, I would just like to pause for one moment to acknowledge that the work of the treasurer and the deputy treasurer is here with us tonight. That this presentation, as an example, is a new form of budgeting, which we've talked a little bit about, that was supported by the entire organization. And some of the projects I'm going to talk to in a couple of minutes are ones that, while corporate services may be representing, they are corporate partnerships with infrastructure and community services as well. Next slide. Building on the presentation from last night on government modernization, the operating requests of corporate services support key transformative initiatives in the next year and build on the positive work we've been doing to position us for the future. And this includes launching the Digital First initiative that will enable more access to online services, which include the new website, which is coming next year, and this app, which is a mock-up for illustration, that will feature report a problem reporting. Will make the town easier to do business with by enhancing and enabling new services, enhancing engagement and communications with residents and businesses, and provide new tools for staff. That will be supported by focusing on a culture that is wanting to attract and retain talent so that we can ensure that we continuously improve. Now, those two things in combination will bring new tools and a focus on culture for the workforce with planning and development as key initiatives to increase both employee engagement and satisfaction so that people's jobs are easier and less manual, and by extension, will create operating efficiencies while ensuring we're future ready. So next slide. This is a big topic that we're just going to touch on tonight, but the concept is that some of the efficiency funding from next year will go towards this, and some of the operating requests from corporate services will support this initiative. So what's a smart city, or in this case, a smart community? A smart community is focused on improving quality of life. It uses technology and data to maximize the use of limited resources to enable sustainability, resiliency, and livability. And this has been an initiative that is happening globally as municipalities change the way they deliver services. Next slide. So yesterday I spoke briefly about some of the opportunities that can come with the use of new technologies such as Internet of Things and enhanced analytics. And there are a number of smart verticals that can be achieved, and the senior team has done some initial work to start identifying high-value use cases. Just touching on some of the examples that could be pursued, you have smart mobility, which would include, but not be limited to, fleet, route optimization to make sure that your routes are effectively planned and managed, and predictive maintenance on vehicles and equipment, and can include things such as, where's my bus? Smart citizens, anchored in digital transformation and collaboration, which we talked on last night. Green initiatives is a key outcome of smart community initiatives where there's a focus on improving the use of resources, including reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also can include things like smart parks where you're looking at soil saturation, be it for your tree canopy or for your fields to reduce the use of water or to increase sustainability. Buildings is a key focal area of smart city initiatives because of the operational savings that come with smart buildings through building automation systems. I'm trying not to use acronyms, so I apologize. And that will include reducing resource consumption such as energy and water and enabling portfolio management. Water is a key area of focus for my friend, Mr. Jones, but leak detection is one where we can focus on non-revenue water loss as well as preventative infrastructure maintenance, because the industry will tell you 8 out of 10 times something leaks before it breaks, and when it breaks in an emergency situation, it's more expensive to repair and the damage in the community is higher. And flood mitigation is another common use case globally that we could consider. So ultimately, there are 2 tracks with the smart city, and this is a more complicated topic, usually in more slides, but hopefully my summary is sufficient, where we expect to focus on understanding the benefits and return on investment for each of the verticals before there are decisions made as to which ones to pursue with the highest impact. But ultimately, the full value from a smart city comes from a portfolio approach to project delivery and execution that ultimately enables the municipality to understanding what's happened across the town through integrated systems that will enhance service delivery and enable broader planning to maximize operations. Next slide. So to enhance corporate services, the team has operating requests in 2020, which have been included in your package. There are 2 main areas there. There's the transfers to and from other areas, as well as the new requests. Next slide. So the key drivers, which a couple of which have been touched on already, is the transfer of the GM salary spread across the divisions, similar to what happened in the 2 other departments last year, as well as the movement from the procurement role from the CAO's office into finance. And I'm pleased to say Tamika McIntosh joined us from the City of Toronto last week. We also have the funding for the crossing guards moving from the clerk's department under bylaw to community services, and functionally from infrastructure services to community services. And those collectively have no impact to the town's overall budget. In terms of new requests, you'll see the request for the digital implementation manager, who would be intended to lead some of the initiatives that I've talked about so far, working in partnership with the corporation and IT, including the governance that we spoke of, the change management, and then business realization on investment, which I think is a critical component of new investments. There's also a ask for a 0.5 human resource coordinator to increase the capacity of that team. That will enable more bandwidth for core functions like recruiting, as well as enable a shift to more focused strategic HR functions. and 0.5 for a bylaw officer that is intended to provide additional capacity for that team. That's a small team. There's 2 people on the team currently, and so that would increase their capacity to reply to requests, but also provide additional resources for, as an example, when they're on training or there's vacations in the summer, sometimes we're low on staff in the field. Next slide. And I'll leave you with this. Ask yourself, couldn't this be different? Couldn't this be better? This picture was taken in the Philips Museum in Eindhoven, where they launched a major smart lighting project in partnership with Philips, and the museum is dedicated to light. So this year we've tried to change the tone of the budget process, and as we move into next year, we'll be looking to evolve a number of services that we've talked about collectively. And the focus on light is in reference to continuous improvement, because the creation of the electric light bulb did not come from the continuous improvement of candles.
Thank you, General Manager McKinney. Just a quick lead-in, though, since you're talking about technology, one of the things I was quite pleased with is the use of Perfect Minds and technology to register for our programs and services. We've seen a huge increase in the online take-up. Right now, we went from roughly 16, 18 months ago, from 33, 34% online registration to a little over 75%. So you're seeing a huge improvement in how people use the online system. And another thing from the lighting system, and you speak about light, we're starting to see our benefit of all of our LEDs and our lighting improvements, utility improvements over the last couple of years, and we're trending to have our payback in a little less than 3 years on the system. So you're seeing $25,000, $30,000 decrease in utilities because of the use of these LED lights and so on. So we're starting to see some of that benefit. Community services, as I was saying last night, is a very broad sweep. It covers a lot of areas, and we're very engaging in terms of how we deal with the community. We're front-facing, so we deal with a lot of the community residents and stakeholders and so on and so forth. And just a quick overview again, when you look at economic development or recreation programs and events, or whether it's facilities, whether it's fire or libraries, we are very people-oriented, and what we deliver on a day-to-day basis and using all of our resources takes a lot of effort on behalf of a lot of people. So the budget you're seeing before you in community services comes from a huge group of dedicated people that's working on a whole broad sweep of community services and programs. One of the big things happening in our, you see here, it actually looks quite large here. I like it on one point, another one I'm saying, okay. Put it in perspective, since corporate services and infrastructure decided they want to shift the crossing guards to community services, we're seeing a little bump in our budget, and we're looking forward to working with the crossing guards in 2020. That's roughly lower 365,000, I can change, but it's a great move in terms of how we deliver services going forward. The other change drivers for us would be, we made a bit of a business change, if you would, because we were showing our facility operators and some other part-time staff under the recreation events portfolio, and we made a shift so it falls with the facilities, and now you see that business piece under facilities. That's why you're seeing a big shift in terms of our the impact from, there's no impact, but it's from the recreation events side to the facility side. Quite a change in the dollar values. And of course, the crossing guard shift. Those are big drivers.
Thank you, Mr. Osmond. Good evening, Mayor Brown, members of council. I'll be presenting the operating budget for infrastructure services this evening. The preparation of this budget has been a team effort, and I'm pleased to have all of my managers in attendance tonight. Mrs. Ewald, Ward, and Lackey, along with Ms. Clayton and Ms. McGinnity, all played an instrumental part in putting together the operating budget, and they are available to answer any questions that council may have this evening. So like my friend Mr. Osmond, I very much like this graphic. This graphic shows the 3 divisions within infrastructure services that are funded by the tax levy. Environment as well as building are self-funded services. And as you can see, the overall infrastructure services levy on taxes is going down by 0.29%. And that is made up of, move slide forward, please. Yeah, if that's made up of the 4 divisions. There we go, that's what I wanted to see. Primarily, you can see Public Works is the lion's share of this, but it's worth pointing out that planning, the one that's transportation is transit, as well as cemetery, are all budgets that are very much affected by revenue. Certainly, you can see the cemetery budget of $12,313. There's a lot of expenses and a lot of revenues in that budget, as there is in transit and to a lesser extent planning. What you're seeing there are the net costs. And as it turns out, all of those are declining just a little bit in 2020 in the proposed budget. And the reason why they are declining is there's a variety of drivers, but 2 that I wanted to point out was an increase in planning application revenue. Several years ago in 2016, we had a year where planning revenue was actually quite low. And as a result, we've tried to budget quite conservatively. We've reached a point now where our 5-year average, even including 2016, was a fair bit larger than what we had budgeted during the 2019 years. So we've increased our revenue projections for planning for 2020, which of course ends up decreasing the overall budget somewhat. The other allowance is similar, and it's a decrease in our allowance for snow removal. Now, removal isn't so much the plowing, it's when we get to a point where the snowbanks are just too high and we have to come in with the blowers and the dump trucks and start hauling snow away. This is a budget that is very much variable from year to year. You have a bad year and we can spend a tremendous amount of money on it. You have a year where we get timely melts through January and February and we can spend very little. So we do have a reserve for snow removal, and when we have a good year, we transfer money into that reserve so that when we have a bad year, we can transfer money out of it. What we try to do is keep a 5-year running average to try and get that balance between the good years and the bad years. And right now, our 5-year running average was such that we could decrease our allowance for snow removal, thereby trending the budget downward. As I mentioned earlier, there are services within infrastructure services that are self-funded that do not impact the tax levy. Within the Environment Division, it's water and wastewater, and then there's the cost of the Building Division. Now, this slide requires a little bit of explanation because what you're seeing here in terms of the total dollar figures as well as the percentage increases or decreases are our expenses plus our projected transfer to reserves. So if we were to look at water for an example, we will collect a certain amount of revenue in water rates, and that is to fund both operating and capital projects. So the amount that we collect in rates exceeds our operating budget because we need an amount of money into reserve so that we can then fund our water capital program. What you're seeing is an anticipated amount of revenue in 2020 relative to 2019. I say anticipated because we are in the process of doing a water and a wastewater rate study right now, and that will dictate what the rates are for the 5-year period beginning in 2020. But with that projection, we project to be collecting 2.25% more revenue in 2020 than we did in 2019, that the excess beyond our operating budget is what would get transferred into reserves. And the same is true for wastewater. In terms of building, it isn't so much rates as it's the fees, the building permit fees that we collect. So some of the drivers in the self-funded services, as it turns out, the majority of these are in water. Our water meter maintenance contract, we went out to procure a new contract this year, and the costs declined. So we were able to save a bit of money there. Several weeks ago, there was a report on Council's agenda with respect to a proposed water softener rebate program. I won't reiterate those details, but we have included that program in the 2020 draft operating budget, and there will be some costs associated with that. The third driver to mention is semi-annual maintenance that's required on well 6. Well 6 is the well that is on the town line, sort of going west out of town into East Garifraxa. It's a well that is getting old, and it's seeing declining capacity, and we've had experts looking at it, and we've determined that we need to do semi-annual maintenance on it to ensure that we maintain that capacity going forward. And the last driver is the increase in reserve contributions. As I mentioned, what you saw on that last slide was both our expenses as well as our reserve fund contributions.
And that concludes our presentation for tonight. I would like to take a moment before I open the floor for questioning to thank all our stellar lineup of presenters tonight, Ms. McKinney, Mr. Jones, and Mr. Osmond. I also would like to take a moment to thank our global management team for making this budget a success, as well as my Deputy Treasurer, Ms. West. With that being said, the general recommendation before Council is to approve the 1.5% increase in tax levy as presented. At this point in time, I would like to thank Your Worship and the rest of Council, and we will open the floor for questioning.
Very good. Thank you, Treasurer Said. Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Yes, thank you. A very good presentation. I just had a quick question about the bylaw officer, the half bylaw officer. Will that include a nights, like be able to do bylaw at night?
No, we have not accounted for a 24-hour schedule or a night shift at this time. We were contemplating some shifts that would not carry on through the night, if I can say that, but for some later hours with respect to enforcement as it related, particularly for perhaps signs and for parking.
Okay. Yes, great presentation by all tonight. Very excited about the digital side of things, and I know that that's going to pay dividends down the road for our residents and also internally for all of us to communicate better. So very happy to see all that moving ahead. I think my feeling is tonight that we should be receiving this and continuing to do some studying on this. I don't know whether councillors want to get into this. Councillor Taylor had to is absent tonight, and I'm wondering if we should call a short meeting tonight and maybe get into this after, particularly after the police vote, which is going to have some impact here on our decision making going forward. So, councillors, do you have any further comment on this? Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move forward. We only have 2 meetings after this. I know we took 4 meetings to do it last year, and that was our first year, and it's a very well-presented budget with perhaps not too many discussion points, but the last thing I want is this to continue into the new year. So I'm ready to discuss certain items if we feel we can get through some of them. We're already here, but at, obviously I'm just one of us. A shame that Councillor Taylor isn't here to start the discussion, but I think we could certainly start knocking off some items. I'm prepared to do so at least.
Okay. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and I also agree with Councillor Peters. I think all of us have come to the table with a lot of homework done, and I would like to certainly take advantage of some of the staff that are also here who may be able to provide a few answers. I mean, we don't have to go into great lengths tonight, out of respect that Councillor Taylor is also absent, but I feel that we could maximize at least the time that staff are here and pose some questions that hopefully we can get some answers to.
Okay. Well, who would like to open up?
Hey, the mic's on me.
Okay. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you.
Carry on.
I'm assuming I would direct this to the treasurer, and then you would end up passing it on to whomever. Since we're talking about operating, and I've had an opportunity to review this as my colleagues have. And what I've noticed is some clarity about the dispersal of funds from one department or division to another, and that's helped us to at least understand, for the most part, where some of the dollars and cents are going. But I did have a couple of questions pertaining to a couple of lined items, and so I hope you don't mind on how I'm going to be throwing this at the dartboard tonight. Is I will reference a particular page, and for those from the different departments, if it is directed at them, they'll have an idea of maybe where it's going to go. So I'll be a little more specific. What I did notice, again, from a specific lined item, this was pertaining to, and I've got to find my actual page here. As you can see, all of us have come to the table with a lot of questions. And when you know it, I did have it here. I apologize. This was referencing, here it is. This would be under facilities and parks. And so this would have been a compensation increase. And again, this might be just for clarification. This would be on page 103. And I hope you don't mind going through it in this fashion. I noticed a 49% increase on compensation. Because, Mr. Osmond, you referenced the crossing guard portfolio coming over into your area. Is that correct?
That's correct,
Okay.
Councillor.
Yeah, and so you had referenced an increase of a certain number, but I noticed here there was an increase of approximately 49% from 1.2 to 1.8. So would you be able to provide just a little bit of explanation on that line?
The line we're referring to would be where we made the adjustment from recreation events into facilities.
Okay.
So we transfer the compensation piece for facility operators from a line compensation that was in recreation events that were actually tied to the programming of the facility and not facility directly. So now you're seeing that transfer into the facilities directly.
Okay.
And that would be roughly the percentage we're talking about if you look at percentages.
Okay. Thank you. Next, whoever would like to go next, I don't mind sharing tonight.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to, this will be a combination, because as I understand it, the Credit Valley Conservation levy is split between two divisions, if I'm not mistaken. So one being infrastructure, and I don't recall the other, perhaps, but sorry, go ahead.
Through your worship to Councillor Peters. So the CVC levy is allocated or divided amongst corporate allocation, which is our tax levy supported division, as well as water.
Right, okay, thank you. So I guess for the update, if perhaps town staff did not have this number, at the most recent CVC board meeting, those levies were approved after a reweighting of the valued assessment. So I guess depending on how that split is done, that may update the numbers here. So I've got 288,893 for the CVC, and if that's 50-50, I guess we're about 144 in each of those divisions. So that would represent a change by the time we get around to approving those line items.
Councillor Andrews.
Well, thank you. And I apologize for kind of going out of sequence, but just happens to be, I think, the way my approach will be tonight, but I'm going to try and be as clear as I can. This would be to the Madam Treasurer, and I notice on page 23, and again, just looking for clarification, and I think that this is an opportunity for members of council to certainly be able to provide this. Under corporate allocation, so page number 23, and this is the line known under penalties and interest on taxation. I noticed across the board there's a consistent number there of approximately $320,000 right through till 2024. So this would be page 23 of your document under corporate allocations, and this is probably the third item on that list, which is identified as penalties and interest on taxation. Could you just explain a little bit about what that is and why the number is referenced at the same amount till 2024?
Through your worship to Councillor Andrews, thank you for the question. So penalties and taxation is a revenue for us, and so just to give you a little bit of a preamble, higher penalties and interest indicates that we have a larger accounts receivable, which further indicates that taxes are not paid in time. Given that it's a revenue item, traditionally we have always budgeted more conservatively on that side, and the ultimate aim is to make sure that the taxes are collected on a timely manner. So the approach here is to make sure that we are consistent with that revenue line, but not projecting too high of a revenue. Because like I said, at the end of the day, the aim is to make sure we're collecting our taxes on time.
I know that we've had an opportunity to discuss this very casually before. And again, I have the utmost respect to the members of our community, but do we see a higher number of delays in people paying for their taxes in a timely fashion, or are there other factors that might be attributed to that?
So if I may clarify the question, so are you asking me whether we have seen a trend in
Correct.
higher?
Yes.
So the trend that we're seeing is not outside of the industry trend. So our taxes receivable is fairly within the industry standard. But like I said, at the end of the day, having our taxes paid in time helps us with cash flow. And moving forward, one of the initiatives that we're taking at Finance Division is to make sure that we have a robust taxes receivable policy, and we have tools in place to make sure that the collection efforts are more timely.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question on that same page. Can you elaborate a little bit more on tax write-offs? We've got $500,000, so what are we writing off?
Thank you, Worship. So tax write-offs are essentially reassessments. So when people file for 357, request for reconsideration, so essentially, and you will see a more hike in a reassessment year, which 2020 is. As Council is aware, every 4 years we go through our reassessment phase. So for those reassessment year, we usually budget a little higher, and essentially these are reassessment requested by our ratepayers.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to the Treasurer. Actually, I was going to be touching base on that. Sorry, I can't see you. Okay, back to the tax write-offs. And I realize that, yes, we're coming up to a reassessment year, and typically that's when you get most appeals. However, I did question this in last year's budget because I believe they had asked for an increase from $400,000 to $500,000. I was explained that there was many appeals in front of the board, the ARB. I don't know, maybe you don't have this information readily available, but do you know if those decisions have been made, or are they still seeming to have to be taken over to next year? Because I know the ARB takes a long time to hear these cases.
Madam Treasurer.
Through your worship to Councillor Sherwood, so you're absolutely correct. So there are numbers of appeals that are sitting with ARB. So again, part of our overall initiative in making sure that our taxes are collected in a timely manner, as well as we want to make sure that our assessment base is protected. One of the initiatives we're looking into in 2020 is to sort of actively approach ARB and making sure some of our files are closed. So I do not have the exact number of ARB appeals that are outstanding right now, but part of the increase in write-off is to mitigate some of the appeals that are still outstanding.
And just to further ask on that, in the tax write-off, this council had requested county council to eliminate the vacancy rebate program, and I know that the county is in favor of eliminating that in 2020. And I believe last year the vacancy rebates, don't quote me, might have been around $160,000. Do you know if that is part of this $500,000, or did that appear somewhere else and has disappeared in this year's budget?
Madam Treasurer.
Again, through your worship to Councillor Sherwood. So I haven't had any definitive answer from the county in terms of the elimination of the vacancy rebate program yet. So that is still in the talks. So until such time we have an idea where that is going, we are budgeting as is, given that part of the write-off, it factors in the rebate program. And like I said, until such time we know one way or the other in terms of the program, whether it's staying or whether it will be eliminated, we have to continue with our budgeting numbers.
And it's part of that 500,000.
That's
Thank you.
correct.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ms. McKinney, if you don't mind. I'm on page 27. We're looking at asset management plan study. So we've got 250,000 this year, as well as a couple future years at another 250. Just hoping you can elaborate on what that scope includes. Is that external consulting? Is that internal capital? What needs to be done in this year approaching the asset management deadlines that we have for 2021?
Thank you. Through the mayor, predominantly that is consulting funds, as we need to do a holistic update to our current plan to bring it up to the requirements for the approaching deadline, and then it's set to the cycles for the expansion and the regulations as we move past hard services in the first round to soft services and service-based budgeting and beyond. I'll just look to the treasurer, this is kind of her baby, see if there's anything she'd like to add.
Okay. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Yes, thank you. Not a question, I just wanted to let the treasurer know that we do have a meeting on Thursday, and I will ask the question where we're at on the rebate, the 30%. Okay.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And on the topic of consultants and/or professional fees, this would be also going back to page 23. And I guess a question pertaining to a decrease in 2020. I guess two parts to this. I see the fee, and for the sake of members of council and the audience too as well, would consultancy fees be under the professional fees, or is that something with another definition? And I'll have another part to my question in just a second. So is professional fees consultant fees, or is that, you know, some other individual or company or?
So I believe professional fees or third-party consultant fees are
Okay.
fairly interchangeable in this regard.
Okay, so then the question or the follow-up is, I notice there's a reduction. Do we have a contingency in case there are needs for additional consultants, that, all of a sudden something comes out of the blue that we need to have support for a particular matter? Would that be covered through another line? How would you explain that to us?
Thank you again, through your worship to Councillor Andrews. So there are two ways to go about it. With any budget envelope, there's always a little bit of room because nobody budgets tightly to the last cent. So there's always room. The other way to go about this is definitely our discretionary general reserve. So if there is ever a need or emergency where we have to engage a third-party consultant, and if that budget item is, for whatever reason, cannot be accommodated through the budget envelope of that particular division, department, then we can always go into our discretionary general reserve.
So is there a reason why there is a reduction for 2020?
My understanding would be in 2019 we had some studies done, including the development charges study, as well as the water wastewater studies. Those studies are not going to be in the 2020 budget. Okay. So every time you see ebbs and flow in terms of professional and consultant line item, essentially these are due to studies done in different iterative.
And looking at the budget package, I see the sequence of things that are going to be coming in years to, that we don't need the consultants at this time, but obviously the projects have been completed, and so thus we move on to the next needs of the town. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to propose getting the clerk involved, so I'm going to make a motion on a couple of the line items I think are fairly straightforward. So I would propose that the planning budget, which as of now only includes the update to the official plan, the library budget in full, which is a fairly standard inclusion of items, and the fire budget exclusive of the fire hall. So looking at the new truck, the bunker gear, the radio. We could break those up, but I'd start by putting those together and approving them as presented. Obviously up for other commentary on that, but I think those are three we could tackle right away.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. I would support that, but on one note, I did, and this is through Mr. Osmond, I did have a request for some clarification on a particular item within the library budget. Were you able to get additional information on that? This was the one that, again, there's a secondary party that provides some support for library services. And this is forecasted in 2021, 2022. So this would not affect this particular budget. So what I'll do is I'll leave it at that. We did have our conversation, so my apologies. So I would endorse Councillor Peters' motion here. Okay.
So councillors, any further commentary on what Councillor Peters has suggested here? I think Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, through you and to Council, just had a quick discussion with our Treasurer. I think the intent, what we would prefer to see from a staff perspective to move the things along, maybe if Council has the discussions and instead of approving different parts of the budget, it just makes it a little more complicated for us. If we can have the discussions and maybe when Council gets to the point of where they want to remove stuff or ask staff to go and bring back stuff, things of that nature, it may be a little simpler for us to approve it all as a whole or approve it with some reductions or additions as Council sees fit. Just for your consideration.
Okay. It does seem in the past there's been some parsing out of the budget in past years, but Councillor Peters?
I'm certainly up for any path that makes it easiest on staff. That said, sort of my methodology going through this, and this is sort of how I approach other large tasks in my life, is, you know, when you can take a bunch of those out, either having sort of approved or denied, perhaps in this case, it shortens the stack of other conversations we have to have. So that was my thinking behind it. But you know, by the time we get to a budget in full, there may be one or two items that each of us still have debate with, for example, and I wouldn't expect someone to approve the budget in full if there were a lingering item or two. So that was my intent in terms of putting some of these forward. But I do want to make it easy for staff to not only document but translate into, you know, the official the budget moving forward. So I guess I'd ask maybe through you to the clerk if there's a way that we can capture some of these decisions, perhaps to lighten the load as we move forward, that may still that wouldn't overburden the administrative process and perhaps the treasurer as well.
So I will also seek the okay from the treasurer to make sure that she's on board with this, but I would suspect that they would, staff would appreciate it if council could perhaps deal with the capital budget first. And if there's anything that, like if you feel that you can approve what's presented in the capital budget for the most, like everything in there at this time, then you could do so. If there's a specific project that we need to come back to, we could note that specific project and then approve in whole with what your decision is on that specific project. But I think as a first step, it would be best if we could deal with the capital budget as a whole.
Okay, fair enough. I want to make a comment on one item. That was the proposed digital sign that Economic Development has proposed. This goes back to the Roger Brooks presentation of December 2018. And I know during that presentation, the thought about having additional signage on Highway 10 to help direct potential tourists into the downtown core was something that had been identified at that time. I've reached, you know, having a long history in the sign industry, I reached out to some people that I know about digital signs and what sort of the state of the art is with respect to signage on highways. And in my opinion, the proposal to put a sign at the intersection of Highway 10 and Highway 9 does not achieve the goal of directing northbound traffic into downtown. it's too late to make a decision at that point. And I believe that if we were going to spend significant money on a sign like that, that it should be located further south. And there are places at the intersection of the bypass and Highway 10 that the town owns. My opinion would be a more suitable place. Also, signs like this often are financed, and in the private sector, the type of financing that could be had on a sign like that could actually be paid for almost in its entirety by revenue generated by advertising. In fact, I did get a quote on a similar type of display at a cost of about $2,500 per month as a lease, which was everything installed, 17-foot wide by 9-foot high electronic display, single-faced facing southbound. That type of money, $2,500 a month, just so you know, on an MTO highway, you're only allowed to put an image up every 3 minutes. It can't be video. There can be no motion on the display. So that means within an hour you could have 20 different messages put up on the highway. So, you know, I'm quite certain that if we took 10 of those advertising spaces in an hour at $250 per month, that you would have a lineup of advertisers willing to pay that. So my proposal is, I think we need to look at that particular item in a little more depth. I think there's other opportunities to pay for this display, and I would suggest we remove it entirely until we have a more fulsome discussion and look at other locations on the highway for a sign like that. I'm fully supportive of doing the sign. I just don't believe that we need to put $120,000 into it. So my proposal would be to eliminate that entirely and continue the discussion with Ruth Phillips and Mr. Osmond on something, and the BIA. I think they need to be a part of this discussion. Councillor Post.
If everybody wants to continue with that conversation first, I can go back to mine. I can remove myself from the queue because mine is about something completely different.
Okay. I guess, I mean, does anybody want to weigh in on what I just said? Councillor Peters? Oh, Councillor Andrews? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and Your Worship, I have the utmost respect regarding your experience and having a little bit of a background also in the marketing side. I feel that in this particular situation, a little more in-depth investigation on options, I think is warranted. I know that, you know, part of the information was talking about a replication of, you know, the Tony Rose and or the Alder Street location signs that we have, which are really, I think, important for those particular venues, but this is our calling card. And for those of us who have had an opportunity to maybe take a look at some other communities, one comes to mind as Cambridge, as an example, which they have strategically located through a combination of partners, through their Board of Trade or Chamber of Commerce. They've worked with the community, the municipality, and all the different stakeholders. And what it does do, it provides a wonderful calling card that's complementary of everything that is going on here. So I feel that your comment about further investigation is warranted. Certainly looking at some of the other partners that would be involved with this, and the revenue generation, I feel, is an area that would benefit it tremendously.
Right. Okay. The other item that I was talking with Ms. Phillips about was there's a number of gateways into our town, and you know, if you come off Highway 10 at First Street, coming into town there's a cacophony of signs. There's probably 6 or 7 of them there. In fact, it's sign pollution is what it is, and so all of those signs could be replaced with one sign, which with the digital medium that it is, all of those stakeholders that were there, for instance, the service clubs have a sign there. There's some signage for wayfinding. All of that could be combined, and I think the clutter that's out there could be reduced. So I think there's a bigger picture there to look at, and I would hope we can work together with economic development and the BIA and look at maybe financing a bigger picture through some partnerships, business partnerships that can help defray these costs. So, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mine was more of a question, I suppose. By removing it from this budget, are you proposing it would not be in the budget for this year, or just
Correct.
take it out of our first sort of cut at this?
No, correct. Just remove it.
So 2021
altogether.
perhaps?
I think there needs to be some more discussion, and as I said, I think there's an opportunity to do this year, but just not that we don't have to pay for it.
Right.
I mean, at $2,500 a month, that's what it costs to finance it. I'm quite certain we can find revenue generation to that level by businesses in town here that would like to be on the highway when you've got, 25, 30,000 cars a day going by that site.
Right.
There's no question in my mind that we can pay for it in other ways. So my recommendation would be to remove it altogether. Yeah, okay. That's correct. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Osmond. I'm referring to page 184. It's a capital project with regards to the Karen Court multipurpose pad. This was brought up in the budget last year, and I wasn't in favor of re-asphalting that. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of forgetting what our direction was to you. I think there was going to be some kind of engagement with that area. And maybe you could update me, and I'll let you know where else I'm going from here. Because I know it's a small ticket item, but again, I'm not in favor of that.
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, on Karen Court, first of all, what we've done is we've included in our our evaluation being done during the master plan project. So as we're doing a master plan, we're looking at all the parks and some of the things we're doing with those parks, as well as we've also engaged with the community that's in the school system. We've engaged some high school, ODSS, who are also want to be partnering on some of our basketball court areas and our blacktop areas that are multi-purpose. And we want to include these guys in our survey process because they've recently taken a look at a couple of those areas, one being Karen Court. And we believe that area can be updated to be multi-purpose, including a basketball, ball hockey, pickleball, and so on. In the master plan process, we're asking the municipality and residents, what would you like in your area, and so on and so forth. And we're getting feedback on all of our parks, that being one. So we've included that in our capital budget again this year to hopefully not just we would pay a portion of it, we may get funding from other sources as well. But Karen Court is still a facility that we think is required, and the neighborhood will require it, and we will, if it gets taken out through the master plan process, that may happen, but right now we don't see taking it out of capital budget. We're going to leave it in until we see what happens with the residents in the area.
Is it of a safety issue right now with that area? Because again, I'm not in favor of this.
Well, let me add a little bit on to what Mr. Osmond said. So Mr. Osmond and I had a meeting 3 weeks ago, right? Three weeks ago with a group of young leaders from ODSS. They approached the town, and they also approached Mr. Jesse Tipping from Axe Institute. And if you recall, Mr. Tipping was one of our supporters for our Jurassic Park. He runs the Axe Institute out there, which has become sort of a hotbed for basketball prodigies. A number of young men have come out of that facility and signed NCAA Division I scholarships, and some of them have gone to the NBA. So we're becoming known for basketball in this area. So the high schoolers and Mr. Tipping came to Mr. Osmond and I with a proposal to raise money to improve the Karen Court facility and a basketball court at Lavender Lane, I believe was the other one. And we also got into the discussion about the hard surface area behind the old Lions pool house at Idlewild Park, which needs some. So the Lions have already put money into their budget for this year for that. So bringing in these young people from ODSS, bringing in Mr. Tipping and the town, all three of these facilities were going to be earmarked for improvement to attract young people to be playing those games. And they even talked about graphic design and trying to make them exciting to look at. And I was quite taken with their presentation, and there was about 8 or 10 young people that were all over this. So I would, you know, I think it's a relatively small amount of money here. I don't have it in front of me. Do you know, Mr. Osmond? Was it 12?
25,000.
25,000. So I think, you know, our contribution will be something of that, but it sounds like they're prepared to raise a lot of the money elsewhere. And so I personally think we should probably let it go. Maybe this amount of money won't have to be spent by the town, but anyway, it's some further background for you, Councillor Sherwood. Mr. Osmond, did you want to weigh in again?
Your worship, through to Councillor Sherwood. From a safety perspective, at this point, the area is fenced. We would see if we leave it like the way it is, it would be a safety issue going forward. So we will be doing something with it. It has to be something as we dealt with. We need to take the asphalt up and replace it. And at the same time, we see expanding a little bit and making it a little bit of a different layout in terms of where the fences is and so on and so forth. So to make it more usable, if you would, going forward. And as the mayor said, we've met with a group. It makes a lot of sense if we have a lot more ownership with the area, and there's kids in the area that would use it, and we would see an increase in use because of the various activities. If I could, Your Worship, before you go off the digital sign, I wanted to have a quick input on that. We've been doing quite a bit of research on that since that issue came up. While I wouldn't disagree that we need to continue to do homework and discussions, and there may be possibilities for partners, albeit private or public, the concern I have is that when in talking to my first discussions with MTO and our discussion with MTO, we're finding that if we put a digital sign on Highway 10 or a public highway, we right now cannot advertise private commercial on that sign. It has to be for public use only. So we need more clarification on that. We didn't get the clarification in time for budget. So what we're working on now is, for instance, if we, and by the same token, whether you put the locate the sign we're talking about next to the tourism building from wood up to this digital sign in a different location certainly can be well looked at as well, and give us the same bang for the buck if you would. Whether the sign can be paid for by a lease arrangement or that kind of a payout definitely could be looked at. What we generally do is put a number in the budget so we know the value of that sign. If we go forward and find other ways of paying for it, you'll see it disappear over time as we look at that particular item. Right now, we see it as an issue because we don't have a sign that we can use on a real-time basis. We have to go out and literally go out physically and take the signage pieces off and replace it and put the material on the sign. Very difficult. In the digital world, as GM McKinney referred to, we can go onto the sign and make changes from anywhere in real time from a computer or even from our smartphone. So the idea of going digital is not just for that particular sign, but as we feed all of our signs in the system, I do agree with you 100%, is that we have a pollution of signs, if you would, and we're trying to clean all that up by using this kind of digital technology. And I just want you to know that we are doing research on that. It is a big item. And MTO have come back, and I didn't get time to go back and question again, well, how does that really work? Because right now they're saying on a public highway, in this case, we would need to have public use on that sign only.
Right. This is why I would like to, you know, invite the BIA into the conversation, because I think if the BIA is part of the agreement, then their entire association and all the members of the BIA would be able to advertise on that. So there needs to be some further discussion on this for sure. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. I know we're jumping around a bit, but let's go back to basketball. I was the one last year that really questioned that location, lack of parking, the fact there was a school across the road that they could use if they had to. I lived in that area for quite a while. And again, there is no parking at all. I do like that idea. I just hope we don't forget, like there is some area up in Rolling Hills that could also use something like a basketball court or a net, things like that. So again, no parking, school across the road. That's why I wasn't really in favor of it last year.
Forgive me, Your Worship, to Deputy
sir.
Mayor
Yes.
McIntosh. Could you, for Rolling Hills, I may be not tuned into Rolling Hills. Are we talking about Rebecca Hills location? No.
Yes.
Just, yeah, we're also, that's also a location we're looking at as well, just for information, because it's also one that we're doing some work on now for the winter with ice, but at the same time, they've also come back and some of the neighbors are interested in getting involved in something in that area as well. We agree with that. And also the group that we discussed did look at Rebecca Hills as well, so we will be looking at that area for asphalt.
And that will be part of our master plan, Parks and Rec master plan. Okay, Councillor Post.
Thank you very much. My question is also for Mr. Osmond, and it has to do with a few different things that are on here with regards to the rec center, so both with Alder and with Tony Rose. I noticed that there's a number of capital projects that are coming up on both of them, both this year and moving forward. And one of the items in particular is a feasibility plan for a recreational a regional recreation facility. When it comes to the timing of all of these projects going forward, I know that we've got the grant application in, and just wondering when it works out to those capital projects, especially for Tony Rose and Alder, and including that feasibility study, what part does that approval of a grant have in all of these different projects? Because a significant amount of money between the two facilities and the feasibility plan. So just curious how that plays out.
Your Worship,
Mr.
through
Osmond. Yes.
you to Councillor Post. As I alluded to last night, what we have is a bit of a, I won't call it chicken and egg because Councillor Taylor might, the issues a term before. The problem we have, of course, is that we put the budget in as if things were going forward on a per normal basis. ICIP came along and we put everything into that. As you know, we've approved the $10 million allocation in our budget for that particular project from all the pockets we have in the budget you're alluding to, you're referring to. We would have to wait and see what happens to ICIP before we can actually trigger anything else. As an example, the funding in the budget to do a business strategy or a feasibility on a regional facility, we want to have that there because we're trying to look at, well, what happens if we don't do the ICIP in this case now. Should we take a look at a regional facility? Because what we're saying to the community is that if we build facilities going forward, we should be looking at facilities from a joint perspective. For your information, the information of council, that we did get support from all the councils in terms of a letter supporting our project for Alder. So what has basically happened here is that we have really zeroed in on Alder and made Alder that regional facility on a bigger scale. If the ICIP comes and Alder gets triggered and it happens, then we would not visit a feasibility or a business strategy for a regional facility. At the same time, we have things happening in Tony Rose because the facility is in the conditions it's in. If we have the dollars there in case we need to do things with the pool and so on and so forth. But if ICIP gets triggered, then we would drop those items. However, if ICIP gets triggered, those dollars just get shifted over into our $10 million allocation that we have in that particular, the contribution into the particular overall piece, the $35 million project.
Okay, thank you. I had a question on transportation, if I could. Councillor Taylor is chairing the Transit Task Force. I just wanted to get clarification. So there was proposal to do a new transfer station, 2 or 3 locations. Has that been funded already? Is budget dollars available for that if and when that decision gets made? Mr. Jones.
Yes, Your Worship. I believe it was in the 2017 capital budget, money was allocated, and it was based on the conceptual transfer point that we had sketched up at Center Street adjacent to the community garden. That money was allocated, but as you know, we ran into trouble with getting approvals for that, and now we're on hold pending the results of the task force. Ultimately, that money continues to be allocated, and depending on where or if a transfer point is approved, we would determine whether that money was sufficient or whether additional monies would be required.
Okay, and as a follow-up, so the ongoing saga of the bridge on Hanson, could you give us an update? I know the terms, reverse engineering and trying to come up with what's the correct capacity for piping to go in that road. Has there been further work on that, and can you share with us where we're at on that item, please, Mr. Jones?
Your worship, for clarity, are we talking about the bridge or are we talking about the road?
Well, the bridge and the connecting of that road, because my understanding is we can't move forward until we're sort of sure of what the development is in the northwest part of Orangeville.
Understood. In
Right.
terms of the bridge, we do have funding to move forward now with hiring a consultant to move ahead with the design and approvals. We plan on moving that forward relatively soon. We simply want to ensure that the timing of the bridge is such that the road doesn't get built and the bridge is what's holding up the connection. By the same token, we don't want to build, if you'll pardon this expression, a bridge to nowhere if the road isn't pending. The road is currently on privately owned land. That land is part of an application for a subdivision. I know that that particular developer has been having conversations with our planning staff, and hopefully they will be in a position to move forward and try to get draft plan approval in the not-too-distant future. However, following draft plan approval, the developer would then start submitting detailed engineering drawings for the subdivision, including the road, and you'd still probably be looking at a period of time in the order of 18 months before it was constructed.
Okay. One more follow-up. I know Councillor Sherwood's on the docket here, but regarding, again, I guess the most ideal number of transit routes is 4, I believe that's been identified, and it would be important for that bridge connection to be made in order to cover the town. Is that correct?
Your worship, my recollection is that in the transit optimization study, it identified 4 routes, and those routes would extend into areas of the town that currently aren't serviced by our transit system, and there's a significant amount of our town that currently is not. I suspect that if and when the connection is made on Hanson Boulevard, the routes would have to be reviewed to ensure that they continue to be as efficient as possible. If we move to a 4-route system in advance of that connection, I suspect that we would try to get into that subdivision through Broadway and Veterans Way to service that area. But certainly having that connection is important for transit and certainly important for the residents in that part of town.
Right, and in terms of buses, now, wasn't at the last meeting. Has the new bus been received now by the town?
Yes, Your Worship, it has. And I may put Mr. Lackey on the spot, and I'm not 100% sure whether the 4th bus is now active and being used, or whether we're still just getting it up to any day, I'm told. So we do have the bus, it's just going through its final checks and being outfitted and so forth.
And again, I'm sorry, I'm gonna, please oblige me here. On the other buses, now this one is a new manufacturer. It's not the Grand West company, which we've had, I think, significant maintenance issues with. Have those maintenance issues kind of settled down now, or are we still finding we have significant problems with our maintenance of our white buses?
My understanding is that they have settled down somewhat, and you are correct. The manufacturer of the 4th bus is different than the manufacturer of the first 3.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, too. I'm not really sure who, so I'll direct it to the treasurer. She can send me in the right way. Now, excuse me for my ignorance, but I believe I was reading in the document about security cameras. Now, I know I can find it, security cameras for Alder Street. Was there something in security cameras going around Town Hall? Oh, 2021. Okay.
Okay.
Can
So,
you,
Mr. Osmond, can you just give, if you're responsible for facilities, can you just give us an update on what security cameras are in place at our various facilities? Is there a Coles Notes version you can give us of this, please?
Well, Your Worship, through you to all the council, I guess, we have a a large number of security cameras in different facilities all over our community. I'll give you an example. In Alder, there's 32. In this building, if memory serves me correctly, I think we have maybe 4 in this building right now, not including this space we're in.
This is interior only? Or
There's interior and exterior in the library, Alder, Tony Rose. There's cameras throughout the facility, through all facilities. The concern I have is that right now I don't have the list of them, but we do have it in the budget because a lot of our security cameras are outdated, and we're not getting clear pictures, and we also have a distance issue. So the technology has improved, and you're seeing it in the budget for Alder in particular. And I don't recall 1 for or 2 for here. There may be an update in one of our budgets, but for a particular one for Town Hall, I can't recall. The Alder in particular is much larger, and our parking lots are much larger, and the cameras and the parking lots themselves are very difficult to get clear pictures off of them. In this day and age, we use these cameras for lots of reasons. More particularly in the case of an accident or someone were to fall, we use the cameras for insurance purposes. We're not looking at the cameras, but we can go back and get feed from the cameras when we need them. We use them for security reasons, of course, after hours and so on and so forth. We use them for security and safety of our staff inside the buildings. In this building and other buildings where staff are front-facing on counters and so on, so that our staff are well protected.
So just to follow up, Your Worship, on the security cameras, the BIA just recently approved to purchase 2 security cameras along Broadway. Basically, we're expediting it due to recent criminal events that have happened at one of the businesses here not too long ago. And I just wanted to make you aware that we've been working with Mr. Hall, IT, he's not here today. So I just wanted to make you aware, even though, thank you, Councillor Peters, for pointing out that that's a 2021, that's something you may want to take into thought as to whether the ones that the BIA are going to be installing may capture what you were trying to capture for Town Hall.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. This question is directed to Mr. Osmond, and not to put you on the spot, but again, I was most appreciative to hear about the savings that we're starting to see with the investment of LED lighting and other activities at our different facilities across the town. This one is in particular at Alder, and this is regarding the Echo Chill system. I notice it's a rather significant expense in the budget. Do you have an idea what the actual savings might be as we have that unit installed, and maybe explain for the sake of members of council and the general public a little bit about what this particular unit will do at the Alder Street location?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Andrews, probably the best way to explain the EcoChill system, first of all, EcoChill EcoChill is a brand, so whether it's EcoChill or another type of brand, think about the EcoChill as a miniature energy plant. So technically what EcoChill does, the first job of EcoChill is to make ice. So as we generate the energy to make ice, right now if you go around one of our buildings, Tony Rose or Alder, and it's a cold day, in particular you really see it, but you see all this vapor coming off the side of the building which is coming out of a condenser. EcoChill has no condenser. EcoChill takes all the energy and keeps 100%, saves 100% of the energy in the system. So it redirects all that energy to make hot water and make heat. So we would actually take all the energy from the plant internal to the building, and we would send all the energy to warming the water for the pool, all of our showers, water for our ice resurfacing water, and so on and so forth. It also would heat the building. So for instance, in the project we have on the table, from an energy perspective, making it very green, is we take the EcoChill plant to take the energy to give you all the heating for the new ice pad we're proposing, as well as to change up, we're eating the existing ice pads. Right now we use a gas-fired system. We would actually put in a new system, so we would take it's an hot water-generated heating system, and we would heat the buildings that way. If we were building a building brand new and put EcoChill in, we get a lot more economies from it. But in the case of this particular plant, the payback for a plant when you do a a brand-new design and construction is around 5 years, energy savings. In our case now, we're thinking maybe 5 to 7 years, depending on how we can redirect things within their existing system. But on the hot water generation alone, the heating of the water going into the pool alone is huge savings. The reverse of all that is, that's all good stuff, we're making ice. The reverse of all that is, and this, what happens when you don't need all this energy, what happens, I can't go into all the detail, but we captured energy into what we call ice balls. And there's an ice tower. And we take the ice balls and we take those and we take that energy and we melt it. And as it melts, it generates energy again, and we use that again for AC. So we get the AC in the summer. As long as we have energy built up, we can use it. So the EcoChill plant is I always look at it as an energy plant. It's its own energy plant within the building. And when you have a footprint, right now you have a footprint in Alder that's 140,000 square feet. You're going to roughly 200,000 square feet. And when you get that kind of a footprint, you want to get a good way of generating energy and be very, very green. The LED lights is kind of low-hanging fruit, if you would. But when you're getting into an ice plant that's operating for us, 6 to 7 months a year, we're generating ice. As long as you're generating ice, you're creating power. Look at it that way. One of the things we want to do in the new proposal is we'd like to have our ice surface to go summertime. Because even in the summertime, that system can operate at a low cost. As long as it's generating energy, we're using it. So it's saving energy while it's generating energy to make ice. So that's kind of the Coles Notes of it, but it's a really economical way of doing refrigerating and redirecting energy.
Is there a payback? I mean, is there a return on investment?
Absolutely. The payback in a natural standalone system that's designed in a building is 5 years. And you could probably, for a footprint our size, we're probably looking at 5 to 7 year payback on $2 million. It's a huge payback.
And what would the lifespan of that unit be?
Lifespan would be 30 years, be a little bit beyond 30 years, depending on your maintenance.
Okay, great. Another follow-up? Yeah, your microphone's off. Sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. We're back. No, hang on. We'll get you back here. Hang on. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osmond, for that. It was not Coles Notes. That was really a lot of detail, and I truly appreciate that. And I think it helps all of us at the council table, but also the general public, when you look at a lined item that is very expensive. Again, I'm just thinking about that same concept, and I know that Councillor Peters would appreciate this, but looking at this on a more robust application across the town assets, is that something that we're thinking of? Because I noticed one of the line items, and I think Again, I'm trying to figure out where it is in the sequence. It may be a little bit further on in the 5-year, 10-year plan, but there are some units that we're looking at and some of the town assets that have to be replaced. Are there types of units that would also provide that kind of payback for us at some point?
Mr. Osmond.
Your worship, through to Councillor Andrews, the technology in the new HVAC systems, yes, there's a way of us saving dollars. Just to go a step further quickly, one of the things we're hoping, well, not hoping, we will do now is, for instance, we have in our budget to replace a huge HVAC system that it's our heat and air exchange for the pool environment. We will change that unit if the EcoChill goes in. We won't need to replace that unit in particular, if memory serves me correctly, is roughly between $750,000 and $850,000 to replace. We would redirect that. We're doing that if we have an EcoChill system in the buildings. That's one of the savings as well. So in this building alone, we're looking at an HVAC system for the heat and air exchange for the theater and other parts of the building. That too, when you look at the new technology and the way we use our digital technology for those systems, a big part behind these systems is being able to do everything digitally on here and program things, and so that we have rooms that are not active when they're not being used. We're not creating energy for them, or heat, or whatever the case may be. So there's one of the things we have a problem with this building is, as we go along, is we're changing our sensors and we're trying to change the programming in the building, but the technology we haven't caught up with, and we need to catch up with technology and improve that.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a separate question, but just to follow up on that note, having worked on several new rec facilities in my other professional life, you will not see a new arena built without a similar system to EcoChill. So it's, if that system is up for replacement, I fully endorse going in that direction. On a much smaller note, page 111, this is for you again, Mr. Osmond, through you, Mr. Mayor. This is the bridge that crosses Mill Creek just before you get to the Petro-Can off Broadway. We had a bit of a side discussion on this, but perhaps for the rest of council and the public, there is a line item in here to complete the work for that bridge, but you said that work may be done this year instead and would be removed. Could you provide an update on that?
Yes, we never had time to remove it from the budget. That particular line item, after we looked at redesign, has been now out to contract. So the contract is let, and they're now manufacturing it to bring it to site. We may get it in December. It may take the spring, depending on the weather. But we will be pulling that out of the budget. I think it's 25,000 roughly. Yep.
Very good. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Jones. I'm not going to let you sit there quietly and be proud of your reduction. So I'm going to pose a question onto you. Page 259, it is a capital project regarding the Broadway Boulevard brick rehabilitation. I'm wondering if you could speak to us on that. My first thought is that is quite inexpensive for such a small little area, and why are we choosing to replace it with stones other than aesthetically appealing? Is there something we could do cheaper?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood, the bricks on Broadway were installed as part of the Central Broadway reconstruction that took place in the early 90s, and those bricks have essentially reached their end of life, I believe.
Is this the sidewalk bricks? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, along the boulevard.
Sidewalk bricks, not that decorative at the at First and Broadway. Sidewalk, okay? And there's some trip hazards and such there as well. Anyway, carry on,
Correct.
Mr. Jones.
There's sort of the two bricks there. There's the ones that are along the boulevard between the curb and the sidewalk area, generally in front of the stores. We also have bricks that cross Broadway at 2nd Street, Mill, and First and John. Those were put in place, I want to say around 2015 or 2016, to replace what was in there. We aren't looking at doing anything with those bricks that are along the road. They are relatively new and in good shape. The boulevard bricks, as I noted, were put in as part of the Central Broadway reconstruction that took place in the early 90s, and they are at their end of life. As Mayor Brown noted, there are some trip hazards there, and you know, it's something that has been needing to be done for a while. In terms of the overall cost, it is a fairly significant length from Wellington Street all the way to John Street. Were we to replace it with interlocking brick, it's quite labor intensive to do all of that work. Part of the work that we would undertake here as well is undertaking a bit of a class environmental assessment that would evaluate different options for this. This pricing is based on interlocking brick, along with engineering and contingency costs, but there may be a decision made by council and you know, with input from the public to use a different product. I've heard the possibility of stamped concrete or something else, but if this project is approved, then we would move forward with a process where there would be a public process to determine exactly what sort of replacement we would have for those bricks.
So you're proposing to just replace it with what already exists. Did you research options of other cost reduction type of options like you just alluded to?
We haven't done it in great detail. For the purpose of the budget, we've assumed replacing like with like. Depending on the product, it could be a bit more expensive or a bit less expensive depending on the route that we took. And that would all get fleshed out as part of the design and selection process.
Okay, thank you.
As a follow-up, Mr. Jones, is it, you know, many of our storefronts on Broadway are not mobility friendly. Is it possible to engineer improvements to bring the sidewalk up level with many of the storefronts?
That would be one of the things that we would want to look at as part of the design. The challenge that we face is that there are places where it is inaccessible, and then next door it is accessible. And we wouldn't want to be trying to design something that was sort of rolling along from one spot to the next. It's something that needs to be looked at in detail to determine what we could do in terms of design. If we are to change the grade of part of the boulevard, there's already places where there's a difference in grade between the storefronts and the road where the current boulevard bricks sort of fall off. We need to look at what makes the most sense there, both from an accessibility and a health and safety standpoint, and work that in. And that's why there is some engineering that is going to be involved in this design, is to try and determine what we can do to minimize those accessibility issues that you've identified, and to minimize the health and safety risks, and try and make it the most cost-effective project we can.
Right. Okay, thank you. Councillor Post.
Councillor Sherwood stole my thunder because I was actually commenting on that project as well, but in a different way. And my comment will now go through to you, Councillor Sherwood, that as chair of the Accessibility Committee, this particular item is one that is probably one of our biggest concerns that we've addressed. So I was really pleased to see that as part of the budget going forward. And I'm very pleased to hear as well that you're looking at different options rather than going back to the interlocking brick, because they have proven to be a significant trip hazard. I also had the same comment as Mayor Brown, that I would love to see some grading changes made to make all of Broadway more accessible for our community. So similar comments, but.
Thank you. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll stick with the topic since we're on it. Mr. Jones, you mentioned the possibility of going to other materials, and I brought this up with your staff as well. Could you comment on, if we look beyond the capital, what sort of maintenance currently is Public Works doing on interlocking brick in town in terms of hours or dollars, or what sort of upkeep are we budgeting for on a year-over-year basis?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Peters, without diving into the details of the budget, my memory tells me we're spending about $15,000 a year maintaining the bricks on Broadway. Part of the challenge is they've gotten old, you've got some that are deteriorating, and then they need to get replaced. What makes them replacing them a challenge is that over the 28 years that they have been out there, they've worn down. So now, by installing a brick that's the normal thickness, it's thicker than the existing bricks, and so you have to dig down and bury it that much deeper to get it level, or you're creating a trip hazard by replacing the brick. So it's quite labor intensive, and there's a fair bit of that going on every year, and probably most of us can recall being on Broadway in the summer and seeing some folks out there replacing those bricks. So it has become become something of a challenge. It's truly something that is at the end of its useful life.
Right, so if I could, on that note, obviously we don't have the options, but some of the ones that, such as stamped concrete, could be more capital intensive, but may result in long-term savings. And so on that line of thinking, I'd be in favor of actually increasing that budget slightly to, again, it sort of amortizes over the long term if we can go to an option that is less labor intensive. And if we don't end up using that budget because we have a more economic solution through the study, I'd rather have captured it now than have Mr. Jones come back and say instead of 800, it's $1 million, because we want to go to, a new system that is, ABC, better for those reasons. So my 2 cents anyway.
Cheaper is not always better, right? Okay. Anything further, Mr. Jones? One question though, we've had flooding issues in our town. Just wondering, are there any, permeable surfaces that are, do you know, being an environmental engineer, do you know of anything that is robust enough to put in that kind of environment? Sorry. Councillor Andrews, can you go? Sorry. Okay, go ahead, sir.
So in response to your question, I think some of this could come through the engineering study. I'm sure Mr. Jones could comment on it as well. Part of the trouble we have is that although those technologies exist, you have to look at what surrounds it. So you've got concrete and buildings on one side, you've got asphalt on the other. For a fairly small strip of land that won't actually hold it long enough likely to infiltrate, and not knowing what sort of permeability of soils are there underneath, it's one thing to come through the pavers themselves, but if they hit, a pretty dense layer of clay, you're just going to create lift and all sorts of issues, especially in the wintertime. So I would assume that might be part of the study, Mr. Jones, when you look at alternate materials.
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, I really have nothing to add. Councillor Peters is at the nail on the head. This is the sort of thing that we would look at. I don't anticipate a permeable surface being something that's particularly practical there, but it's certainly something that we could look into. I would like to build on a little bit of what Councillor Peters noted with respect to moving to a different type of surface. We do want to look at the overall life cycle costing for the product. Sometimes you spend a little bit more up front, and yet, you know, as the years go by, you end up spending less maintaining it.
Right. Very good. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Andrews,
That's quite
back to you.
That's quite
Yes.
all right, and I apologize, we don't have questions at this time to this side of the House. It seems to be all over there, but we'll come up with something. But this question is for Mr. Osmond, and the one thing I'm most appreciative in our community is the community groups, service clubs that step forward and have a great idea. Lions Club as an example, who have been really wonderful contributors, and we are the benefactors of some of their initiatives. But one of which I noticed, and for my colleagues here at Council, this would be on page, I think it's 202 in your binder, page 207 on your computer. And this is referencing the BMX pump track. So this is an example, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Osmond, where the community has been the benefactor, the town has been the benefactor, but now we're having to take care of that particular site with some asphalt. And we're going to have, and I appreciate the comments that have been made in this particular case, which is when we have, you know, significant rain, all of a sudden that BMX park is kind of difficult to ride your bike on. And so I guess the question is, why asphalt, and is this something that we will have to look at other sites across the community in years to come with some of the benefits we've received from some of these different service clubs?
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, through Councillor Andrews, absolutely. We do have a great partnership with the Lions Club, Rotary Club, and others. This particular venue, if you would, this BMX park area was constructed some years ago on the Alder Park site. And unfortunately, it's a very challenging site to maintain because of the soils and the soil mixture we have. And you can put all the soil you want, but it does compact and it does go astray from time to time when you get wind and all these kinds of different elements. What a pump track actually does is formalize your ride, if you would. Some may say it pimps your ride. The bike itself, or in some cases you can use skateboards and so on and so forth. It would be enhanced with the asphalt. It would lower the maintenance significantly. Very little maintenance on it. It is a bit expensive up front to put the asphalt down or to construct the BMX area or construct the actual flow, if you would, and the curves and that kind of thing. With a pump track, when you're doing your inline curving, it's very stable. In the case of a BMX one we have here right now, it's not stable. It shifts because of the erosion piece. So what the Lions wanted to do was to invest some dollars into updating it into a pump track. And they can be quite large or small depending on the location. Our particular location right now, we have two things we're looking at. The actual site can be updated for asphalt, for pump track. However, we want you to look at that from a lens that you have a huge project that we're looking at Alder that may impact this site. And that although we want to keep on going with the Lions to do this, we may have to relocate it either on the site or somewhere else in the community to facilitate continuing what they want to do, a pump track on some other site or on this site in a reconfigured fashion, if you would, because of the impact of a large building being expanded on the site.
And Councillor Andrews, you're aware that a pump track was installed in Alton, town of Caledon, and apparently it's very successful. And yeah, they did a nice. You've been on it, or your kids have? Yeah. So I think that's where the Lions picked up on this kind of new style of this type of asset. So yeah, great. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Jones. I love this topic. It's the water meter replacement program. Truly, I'm very much looking forward to it. Could you elaborate? I know in 2020 we've got the study, I suppose, both water wastewater rate study, and perhaps that ties into a study of different technologies available for the water meter replacement. Could you perhaps build on that and then also speak to in 2021 where you have the actual replacement? is that based on a certain technology? How could that number perhaps change through your investigations?
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Peters, I'm going to start off, and if I miss anything, I might have to defer it to Ms. McGinnity. The money that's been set aside for 2020 is for the technology selection. We would be hiring a consultant to review the technologies that are available and to help determine what type of technology and help us select the type of technology that fits our needs. We would anticipate that it would be a much smarter technology. The meters that we have now aren't so smart, and it would allow us to have a better handle on the usage, and if there was usage at a residence that was indicative of a leak, we would know it, and potentially the resident would know it much quicker. Part of this study would also be to look at the billing system. When we installed our water meters back in 2002, we hooked in with Orangeville Hydro. Hydro had a meter reader who was going around to every house every day, to houses on a monthly basis, and taking hydro readings. It was an economy of scale, and there was a synergy to have them do that with water meters. Of course, since then, Hydro has moved to smart metering, and they no longer need a meter reader. We are still using one. So we're going to be looking at what makes the most sense for us from a billing perspective. Hopefully, we will be able to collect that information in a smarter way and determine how or if we continue to tie in our billing system with Orangeville Hydro. All of that is going to be part of this system or part of this project in 2020, and then we would move forward with the selection of the technology. And yes, that has the potential to change the overall costs. But I believe that the monies that we have shown for future years are an estimate based on a technology that's out there, and you know, that's why it's a budget forecast for 21 and 22. We would, at this time next year, have a much better idea of what the actual costs were going to be.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. This one's to Mr. Osmond. I see there's a few things for Diane Drive. I know last year the roof blew off. A number of years ago, the council of the day wanted to actually take that down. What do you see the future of that particular building being, and do we need to put more money into it?
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, through to Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Good question. Diane Drive has some history. Diane Drive building right now, we did lose half the roof, salvage the other half. Great job done. It's a whole portable, and it has its own, issues. While we have the asset, we have to maintain the asset. That's our first and foremost concern. Right now, we have money in the budget to replace. The flooring is basically gone. We've been updating it for the last couple of years. We put in new lighting, LED lights. We updated the washrooms and so on to make them wheelchair accessible. We've updated the space. Right now, we have the windows that are completely rotting and got to be replaced. So there's a bunch of things on the site. Right now, as you all might know, the Diane Drive building is our active EOC, our Emergency Operations Center in case of emergency. Is equipped for that purpose. When the fire station comes on stream, we will no longer need that space for that purpose. So that could be anywhere from 2 to 3 years out before he finishes the fire roll. So while we're active, and right now it also houses the fire prevention office. It also houses our training center for all of our computer training and so on, and for our safety training and so on for our town staff. We use that building on a regular basis. We also use it in the summertime for summer recreation programming at the Lions Park, and that's important to us as well. So as long as it's operational in the next 2 or 3 years, we see a use for it. In terms of the future use, we definitely will be putting that out to the community because it may have some community use. We do also use it for stakeholder groups, for volunteer organizations. They use it for their meetings and that kind of thing. And there may be a future in that sense. But right now, it is an active space. It's being well used. And while people are using it, we need to maintain it.
Thank you.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. McKinney. With regards to the police department and the allocation of IT support, can you tell me what staff complement it currently is being utilized by the Orangeville Police Services?
Thank you. Through the mayor, the support provided to the police represent different fractions of various people's time depending on the services required. So they provide service desk support, they provide support with radios, computer systems. So it's similar to other functions. They share that. I think Jason said it's ironically, I have notes from Jason which are currently down digitally. They're literally reading error at this time. But I can get back to you with the precise percentage, but it isn't an individual on the team. It is portions of different people's time.
So I guess what I'm asking is that if, would that be equal to, like, say, half a year's salary of an IT or a full year's salary?
I have the full breakout. If you give me a second, I'll see if I have a paper copy with me.
Okay, and
Okay.
can I ask you also a follow-up question?
Sure.
With regards to the digital implementation manager, perhaps the treasurer can put that slide back up on the screen with regards to staffing requests. I believe the digital implementation manager was part of that ask. I was just wanting to see the amount of money again. Oh,
1 FTE.
I thought I saw a monetary connection to that. Okay. Do you know?
Do you have an estimate for that, Ms.
do you
McKinney?
know? Yeah, that's what I'm.
The staff costs for the digital implementation
It's
manager?
a digital implementation manager.
Implementation manager, yeah.
I thought it was 215,000, but now I see that perhaps the treasurer can clarify. On page 59, I see 215,000, but I guess I was taking that as being the digital implementation manager.
If we can pause for 1 second.
Sure thing.
I have the paper copy. The police currently contribute approximately $90,000 for staffing for service desk, project management, system implementation, and maintenance of the radio 911 systems, including patching and security.
90,000?
Yeah.
Thank you.
In totality, they contribute $130,000, but that includes support for their systems.
The 130,000, is that, are you talking about?
That includes
financial?
software and licensing as well.
Okay, so that has nothing to do with allocation of finance time for policing. This is just strictly IT support?
That's correct, for IT support.
So it's a total of 130,000?
Yes.
Thank you. And then my follow-up question, Your Worship, regarding the digital
Implementation manager?
manager, if I could have a little bit of explanation to that? Perhaps, I believe the treasurer's.
Sorry, treasurer? Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. So through Your Worship to Councillor Sherwood, the Digital Implementation Manager, or DIM, the overall salary envelope, including benefits, we're looking at 140,000 rounded.
Okay.
Okay, so the 215 indicated on page 59 isn't, it's all compensation for within the department. Got it.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Osmond, going back to sort of the facilities discussion, looking at the OSBCA roof replacement, obviously touching on that longevity piece, could you speak to sort of any potential future uses there, or the extent to which we know that the SPCA will remain in that building? And then perhaps comment on whether moving to a metal roof, if that facility is going to be a town asset for, decades instead of years, maybe what the cost differential would be for that.
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Peters, it's a good question. The OSPCA, of course, use a town facility. The contract or the agreement with OSPCA is that we maintain the structure, roof, walls, floors, that kind of thing, and HVAC systems. we had budgeted to put in asphalt shingles, and our budget came in high, and we're getting another piece to finish that. There's a really good question in terms of the longevity of OSPCA and if they're going to continue to use that facility. As long as it's a town asset, it's a good point. And we didn't go to steel because it was a high cost, and I don't have the actual figure. But compared to the asphalt, it's probably about a third. Asphalt is probably a third of the cost of steel in this case. So the question would be, in terms of asking OSPCA how long they're going to stay around. We have not asked that question. Their contract is an agreement that's in place. It's a renewable contract, and unless their facility gets way too small and they need to expand, then they will be there for a long term, I would think. The other thing I would say, in terms of the location of the OSPCA, right now it's aligned with our operations center. The operations center is in the rear yard, if you would, of the OSPCA. So it's a whole tract of land belongs to the town, if you would, just in terms of orientation.
Putting my realtor hat on for a moment, investing in a steel roof is not money that's blown, because if that building decides to be sold down the road, you know, when people look at buildings, they look at roofs, windows, things like that, and if that roof is a lifetime roof or a 50-year roof, it certainly improves the value of that building. So, something to think about. Councillor Sherwood.
Oh, I'm sorry, Your Worship.
Sorry, you
I must have pushed my
okay, all right.
button by mistake.
We will jump over to Councillor Andrews. Sir.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And this is not to direct the question to Mr. Osmond, but just happens to be, you know, the theme of many of us at the table. And this is in no way to capture the attention of Councillor Peters and Councillor Post because they happen to be on the library board, but this is more looking at it not only for 2020, but also in the future. And Mr. Osmond, you and I have had a conversation about vision, and I'm most appreciative of the conversation we've had about the vision of the library. This is really looking at the collection more than anything else. You know, when you get outside of the salaries and general operations, one of the most expensive line items happens to be the collection. And as we take a look at the progression of digitization, how society is moving to a lot of different ways of having materials stored, is there a thought that this expense may end up at some point actually reduce? Because the hard copies, and this is not to say the books of the future will not be on paper, but from a sustainability perspective, I see a lot of things that are moving to the cloud, other ways that people are using tablets. Have you looked at it with the library board and also with the staff on how we might be navigating not only in 2020, but 2024, 2030, on how technology is really going to be changing some of those demands within the library system? Your vision of a center of dialogue where people get together as a gathering spot is, in my opinion, bang on. But it's the technology, I think, that's going to change a little bit about how we end up storing some of the collection, because the collection does take up a lot of real estate. And so I'd like to just hear your comments on that, and maybe looking forward to some changes that might happen, and maybe some of the members of council who are also on the board might be able to answer some of that too. Thank you.
Do you want to speak to this, Councillor Peters, or how? Mr. Osmond?
I'll just make a quick comment, and I know that Councillor Peters is tuned right in on this one. But from a operational perspective, you're absolutely correct. To a certain degree, we do see technology not taking up the real estate. However, when you have technology and people visit that technology in a library, it still has to be there for them to communicate and to use. One of the things we're seeing is that the books are not going away. Our copy books will not go away. It will still take up real estate. But the digital world will change how we do business in libraries. By some of the things we're doing with libraries to attract people in a cross-programming value perspective is bringing people to a site. You alluded to the gathering piece, absolutely. So we see a lot more traffic going into the library, so the footprint of the library may not change, but the actual things that are going on in the library will change in terms of what happens on the floor of the library. I'll ask Councillor Peters to speak to some of the things that are happening, the exciting things happening in on the library on the ground with the board. But the digital side as well, from an expense perspective, it don't get any cheaper. That's another side of the coin we need to look at.
I imagine there's licensing fees and such that would be involved as well. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Andrews, thank you for the question. It does sort of jump out as a large item when you get past the operating side of things. Feel free to jump in, Councillor Post, but I'll try and address the comments so far. So it's my understanding that the collections amount in the budget was steady for quite a few years, including this year, and you'll notice in future years it starts to go up. And while we are seeing many, many more titles coming through electronic means, many of those systems have gone to a subscription base. So rather than purchase one time, so fees for electronic resources can be, in the neighborhood of or more expensive sometimes than hard copies, depending on how quickly you turn those over and how many times they're being taken out and things like that. So from my perspective as a board member and learning what I have from Ms. Fraser in her analysis of the collections capital item, that number is only going to grow. Whereas the total number of items in the system is remaining constant or increasing slightly, and the library uses a benchmark from the province in terms of titles per user, per population. So there are metrics that are being tracked, and the intent of the library at this point is to keep those collection numbers steady and to suit the needs of the users, in this case moving to more electronic subscription-based titles. And so that's where we're seeing that number holding steady or possibly increasing slightly in the future.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm going to bring up the Orangeville Police Services budget, and just to kind of put a suggestion out there that we aren't entitled to go over the line by line of the police service, but I'm asking that the actual operating budget and capital budget as presented be parked until after next week's discussions. I know the clerk has asked us to possibly proceed forward with the approval of the capital budget.
Okay.
But I just wondered if we are going to be moving forward to approving the capital budget, that we exclude the Police Services Board until after next week?
I think that makes sense. Our next council meeting is that vote, so at this point.
So that I'm basically
we'll
just getting it for the record that it be parked.
Right. Okay. We're getting on to 9 o'clock right now. I don't know, councillors, whether you'd like to continue on for some period here, or do we want to? We do also have a question period that we haven't reached yet. I don't know if there's anybody out there that wants to ask questions, but do we want to carry on, or would we want to wrap things up in the next? I'm sorry? I think we should wrap it up. Okay. Councillor Peters.
Perhaps just for sort of our own accounting procedures, and if we're going to be continuing to review this document, if there's anything that we know we want removed from the capital, for example, if the sign item that you brought up, or Karen Court, or some of the items that we discussed tonight, I think it would be better than coming back with 100% of the items in 2 weeks. If there are some that we've already discussed and want to either, well, not endorse because we don't want to do it piecemeal, but remove to the clerk and the treasurer's comments. I don't see why we wouldn't do that now.
Was 25,000 for Karen Court? Yeah. Yeah. No, but we've got some additional support on the Karen Court project now that I'm not sure that, this budget's been worked on for many weeks or maybe months now. So there might be a bit of a haircut there that could be taken and still not affect the project because of the other stakeholders that are now involved in that. So, Councillor Taylor, you've been very quiet tonight, sir. Did you wish to weigh in at all? Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize to everyone for being late this evening. I stumbled in here and was feeling rather sheepish about it, so my apologies to the group. No, not at this time, Your Worship. I don't see us passing this tonight. I'm enjoying what everyone else has to say. There hasn't been anything here that I thought was offensive or worthwhile digging into. So no, I'm quite aligned with what everybody is saying this evening, and I don't think it's going to take us very long to do this. So it's not that I'm nonchalant about it, but last year it seemed like there was so much to do. This year I feel like we're very close in terms of what we need to get done. So thank you for calling on me, but no, I don't have anything appreciable to add tonight. So.
Okay, so I'm just going to maybe call one more time here to councilors for sort of one final question for tonight, and then we'll maybe move on to our question period and wrap this meeting up. So, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to the Treasurer. For confirmation, the current budget, operating budget as it stands, is proposed for a 1.5% increase. If we want to get this budget at 1%, what would be the monetary cuts?
183. 366
let's
was
double
1%.
that.
Right.
So to get to 0.5 increase, if we
You'd
want to
have
reduce
to knock
by
off
1%?
183,000 off your
Treasurer
budget.
confirming that, or? Not that I'm doubting you, Your Worship, but.
They're up on your screen there. 366.
Yeah, I
is,
was trying to remember that figure. So in order to reduce, if we want to reduce this 1%, we're looking at 366.
No, that's an entire 1% reduction would be 366 off. If we were going for 0.5%, it'd be 183.
Yes, and I'm asking about a 1% reduction.
Oh, I thought you meant, I'm sorry, I thought you meant to come down to 1% from 1.5.
No.
Oh.
I was trying,
okay,
I
I'm
was
sorry.
trying to better our increase,
okay.
increase last year was 0.8. So I was hoping that we could come in with 0.5. That's all, where I was just kind of heading.
Okay, very good. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the Treasurer, I know this was short notice last night and it's only been 24 hours, but we are gathered. Did you make any progress on the sort of trend of 10% of the capital projects coming from reserves? If not, we can wait for that in the next couple of weeks. So just, if you had anything, I'd like to keep it in mind as we move forward.
Madam Treasurer.
To your worship, to Councillor Peters. So we did have a chance to look at our overall allocation from reserves to capital projects. So the approach we took, and like I said last night, it wasn't intended to be 10% all across the board. And in fact, it is not 10% all across the board. That seems to be the majority. The approach we took is, given that we have limited reserves to spread, and we do not have sort of a priority scale to rate our projects. So the approach we took is to evenly spread out our reserve allocation to the best of our abilities. And as it turns out, by your calculation, it's 10%.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you. Sorry, I guess I should have just stayed in the queue. I appreciate the answer, and this only being our second budget and our first with you, the background's helpful. Perhaps we'll get into this when we get more into the overall numbers, but if the reserve level is at where it needs to be or needs to grow a little bit, why would we even dip in to do the, let's call it 10% on some of these projects instead of looking at the levy? Is it just a matter of where you make that split, or it seems if we're contributing to reserves and drawing off them that maybe it's a wash? So just maybe perhaps a little more background on that methodology.
Madam Treasurer.
Once again, through your worship, through Councillor Peters. So it is a balancing act, because at one hand, you're trying to minimize the impact on levy increase. On the other hand, you are making sure that you're not, sorry, we're playing hide and seek here. On the other hand, you're trying to make sure that you're not completely depleting your reserve balances and keeping it at an optimal level. As Councillor Peters and the rest of Council would recall, I did bring a report back in August of this year asking for some direction from Council, and at that point, Council provided the direction to maintain our capital budget as well as our transfer to reserve to the same level as 2019, essentially telling us not to increase or not to provide incremental increase to both of those transfers. So that is another way to make sure that we are maintaining an optimal balance, is to provide those incremental increases year over year. So again, going back to your question specifically, it is a balancing act. And some year it may be 10%, some year it may be 15%. But the approach we took is to make sure that we're evenly allocating to the best of our abilities.
Councillor Taylor.
I do have something to say after all. So to your comments earlier about where we would go in terms of the monies and what we're trying to get to in terms of a percentage, I worry about that just a little bit. I think we need to be thinking about next year a little bit as well. So this year is a 1.5, next year is a little bit more than that. You know, if it was possible, I'd rather we look at kind of the holistic piece about what our term is and see if we could borrow a little bit from next year and bring it forward if that meant that we were going to be low, that sort of thing. And then the other premise that I'm looking at is I'm kind of debt averse, so I don't really want to borrow if we can help it, and I'll be looking at that when we're having our discussions. And I'm not excited about the reserves either. We did borrow from our reserve, well, we took from our reserves a fair bit last year to get to where we were, and I'd prefer that we didn't do that again. So it's not an overarching statement about where we should be or anything. It's just kind of those are the things that I'm thinking about while we're going through these things in a holistic way to get to what that number is going to be. And I think the last piece would be is when I talk to citizens and they tell me how upset they are about our taxes, I say yes. I mean, it's not good, right? Like I think we could foil me on the stats, but we were number 1 for a period of time. I think we fell to number 9. Anybody can get me on these stats, but number 9 in Ontario for highest taxed. I'd love to see us in that mid-range. Like if we could be in the 200s out of all the municipalities, I think that would be a great goal of this council. And then we could reassess and have another goal. But I don't know. I don't know that we need to be striving towards that low of an increase. Although I like the idea of it. I just worry about what those other things would be. So anyway, when we're looking at these projects, that's what I'm thinking about as we go. So couldn't get much more conservative than that, could you?
Okay, very good. Okay, we have one item that we skipped, unfortunately, and that was we need to have a motion to receive the report that was item number 7, the sidewalk winter control level of service report. We did that? Is that right?
You actually acknowledged receipt of the correspondence from the delegate that wasn't able to appear.
Right, okay. So that was the acknowledgement just of the correspondence. Motion to, yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So there was some emails that I did receive on that, and again, I apologize, I was late this evening. There was talk about, is there a way now, and I feel like I need to look at you, Councillor Peters, but with the sidewalk removal program, would there be any consideration to looking at what those dates are? So we've had some April snowstorms, we've had some issues in November. Would we talk about massaging the dates? Now, I can answer my own question with that, Mr. Jones, and that is I know that our contracts run December 1st to March 1st, but it would be something that we should potentially consider as time goes on. It seems like it's been a bit of an issue. I think about 2 years ago, you had your entire staff working the weekend to clear the roads because our contract was up and it was April 15th. I'm making all these things up as I go, but that's how I remember it. But it was something like that. So I don't know if that's something we could talk about as a group at some point, but I've certainly had emails to that effect as we go. Yeah, so thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah. Well, it's been a bit of aggravation for sure, but anytime we add contract time, we're talking about tax levy, right, burden. So it's, shifting, not expanding it. Okay, shifting it both directions, because that would be expanding it. Yeah, yeah. This isn't the first time in the history of town of Orangeville this has come up. I think Mr. Jones has probably answered this question from previous councils or multiple councils, perhaps. Mr. Jones? So, you know, and climate change, and if those who believe in climate change, of which a number of us do, I'm thinking that maybe it's going to get better over time than worse, I hope. But it certainly would make sense to go back to town staff and maybe ask what costs would be to do that, to SADA. But again, I just think it's additional costs that we're trying to trim right now rather than, anyway, Mr. Jones, if you could elaborate a little bit.
Certainly, Your Worship. In anticipation of the delegation this evening, I did put together a bit of a background report, providing council with some background on the history of the sidewalk snow clearing program in Orangeville and some of the decisions that we've made and the challenges that we face. I think I started off the report by indicating that when we're setting levels of service, we try and find essentially a sweet spot where there are a certain number of residents who are unhappy. They think that the service should be more, and some people are unhappy because they think that there's too much service and we're taxing them too much and it should be less. Hopefully the majority think that we've hit it pretty much bang on. Currently, the level of service that we have for sidewalk snow clearing, we certainly try to do it whenever we get events. However, we do have seasonal staff through the 4 core winter months from the 1st of December to the end of March. During that time, we have dedicated staff and dedicated equipment, it's leased equipment, that is used to maintain the sidewalks, and I think that we provide quite a high level of service as it relates to clearing the sidewalks. We rent a total of 5 machines to take care of the sidewalks through those 4 core winter months. 2 of those machines we keep from November 15th to April 15th, but they have to be utilized by our full-time staff because our seasonal staff are only with us for those core months. When that's the case, our staff are focused primarily on the roads, and they get to the roads first. And with only 2 machines instead of 5, once we do get to the sidewalks, it takes longer to clear the sidewalks. We could certainly expand the program. However, the challenge isn't just one of dollars and cents, although certainly there's a cost associated with it. We get a large number of complaints when we are out doing sidewalk snow clearing, particularly early in the season, because of the damage that it does to the boulevards. Picture the first snowfall and you're a sidewalk, you're one of our staff out on a sidewalk snow clearing machine, and you see a blank sheet of white in front of you, and you've got about 2 inches of clearance on either side of the blade on the plow. It's difficult not to chew up some of the lawns, and there's a lot of complaints about that. When there's not frost in the ground, that happens. Also, when there's not frost in the ground, those machines are quite heavy and they can damage our sidewalks. While the work needs to be done, there is a cost associated with getting out earlier in the season, particularly if it's going to melt away in a couple of days. So it's trying to find that balance. Late in the season again, we get a lot of complaints late in the season, often in March, when the sidewalk machines are still out, because it may not have snowed for a couple of weeks, and yet they see the machine. During that time of year, you see the snow starting to melt. It bleeds across the sidewalk during the day and then freezes. We're out doing some spot sanding and salting before people are up in the morning and before the kids go to school to try and make the sidewalks as safe as possible. It is one of the programs for which we get a lot of complaints, and we get it on both sides. There are those who believe that we should have a greater level of service. There are those who believe that the level of service is already too much, and we try and find that sweet spot. The last term of council, during the election campaign of 2014, it was an election issue. There was a couple of people running for council who did not think that we should be continuing with the sidewalk snow clearing program, and in fact, there was a sidewalk snow clearing committee that was chaired by the former councillor, Mr. Kidd, who's in the audience tonight, and Mr. Taylor sat on that committee as well, of course. Oh, thank you. You were Mr. Taylor at the time, Councillor Taylor now, excuse me. And at the end of the day, after going through the exercise and reviewing it, the recommendation back to council is that we maintain the level of service that we had at the time, and that was endorsed, albeit not unanimously, by the council of the day. So we do have this level of service. It doesn't make everybody happy, but certainly from a staff perspective, we could come up with numbers to let you know what it would cost to expand this service, and then, of course, it would be a level of service decision of council.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Oh, one more. Mr. Taylor.
If possible, through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Jones, I would like to understand what that is, because I think it would be good just to put it out there to the public, and at the very least have some interaction with the citizens and say, hey, it's $10. Do you want to do it? Or it's whatever it's going to be. But I would appreciate knowing what it would be to do it. Yeah.
So what would you suggest then, Mr. Taylor? Is this a couple more of the vehicles rented
I
for
think
that
it's
additional
I think
shoulder
so.
season?
It's the weeks, right? And I'm not suggesting that we would do it. I think it would be good to have that information so that we all knew probably why we're not going to do it is what we're going to find out, but it would be good to know why we're not going to do it.
Okay. All right, Mr. Jones, could you weigh in there?
Certainly, Your Worship. In the report that I did prepare, I did identify that if we were going to expand the core level of service, I don't believe that renting the machines for a longer period of time would be sufficient. Right now, we have sufficient number of staff to do winter control, full-time staff, but their focus during, call it November and April, is clearly on the roads. If we were going to expand it so that we were looking at having a level of service similar to that we have from December through March, we would also need to be looking at hiring on our seasonal staff or some of our seasonal staff earlier to take care of that function, recognizing that during a year where we have a mild fall, the staff, we would be working to try and find work for them to do during that time.
Okay, thank you. So back to item 7, unfortunately, skipped over this. This is sidewalk winter control report. If we could have a motion to receive this report. Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Post. All in favor? Thank you. And then as we move forward, concluding our budget discussion for tonight, can we move to question period? Anybody from the audience have any questions for council? Oh, here comes Mr. Kidd. No, we need you on the microphone, sir. For the record, your name and where you live, sir.
Don Kidd, 55 Meadow Drive in Orangeville, L9W 4C4.
Thank you.
And I got a couple of comments. I got two at the end, but I just want to make a comment on sidewalk snow clearing. It was horrendous. When you have people walking on the side of the street because it's not safe to walk on the sidewalks, as we had, it's time that possibly they'd done the main First Street, Hanson, where the kids are walking, going to school and such like. You cannot today have people walking on the sides of the street. You're liable to have the woman who comes down the street and thinks she shouldn't be there and gives you the finger, which is fine. But why are you on the street? Well, you can't walk on the sidewalk. That's why. That's all I have to add about that. Now, Mr. Mayor, just for clarity, how many questions am I allowed to ask?
Well, one, then you'll have to get back in line.
Okay, thank you very much. So, number one, in the future at budget meetings, could we have, when council or staff or whoever is looking at page number 3, could we have the contents on page number 3 come up on the screen like it used to come up in the past?
I think that's a reasonable request.
Because it'd be kind of nice to see what you people are talking about.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be reasonable, yes.
Now I have number 2, and this may be incidental, but this is an information question, because I don't dig wells.
Right.
Well 6, maintenance. Does that mean drilling the well deeper, or what exactly does that mean through you to Mr. Jones?
Mr. Jones?
Through you, your worship, to Mr. Kidd, essentially well maintenance would involve potentially airlifting and acidizing the well to, if you can picture it, the well plugs up over time. And what we would be looking at doing is sort of cleaning it, as it were, to try and renew its capacity. We've deemed that it's something that probably needs to be done on a semi-annual basis, but at some point it may reach the point where the well does need to be re-drilled, but that isn't part of this budget.
Okay, thank you. Question 4, again to Mr. Jones. Water meters, the new ones you are looking at. Will I have the ability to go on my computer or my iPhone and say, how come I'm using more water? Or you get the idea of what I mean.
Mr.
I'm
Jones.
just wondering.
Through your worship, we will be going through an exercise where we will be selecting the technology during 2020, but our expectation is, yes, that is the sort of thing that we are looking at. There are different options that would be available, but certainly one of them would involve an ability for residents to go online and check their usage in much the same way that they currently can with their hydro usage.
It would be nice if there was some sort of an alarm setting.
Yes.
Because we, this council and the councils previous have had people show up with $1,000 and in one case $3,000 monthly water bills, and because they didn't recognize a problem. So hopefully this technology can notify the resident that something's going on. Mr. Jones, is that?
Certainly, your worship, all of this is going to be part of the technology selection, and this is all good information for us to utilize when we move forward with that exercise.
Very good.
Now, number, where are we? 5.
Just, can you hold for 1 sec? We're
I
just going to have
certainly
Mr. Peters going to weigh in here. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just thought it would be a good opportunity for a segue for those that do track their electricity at home, for example, that you can set up notifications, or it's my understanding, you can set up notifications through Orangeville Hydro at various limits, much like what Mr. Kidd would be proposing for water. We already have for electricity. So for those of you that worry about your electricity bills, take a look at that, and maybe you can monitor your usage because that program is available.
Great, thank you. Mr. Kidd.
Thank you. Number 5, Diane Drive, the building at Diane Drive. And this may be, and Mr. Osmond will certainly know better than Don Kidd knows. But that building, if it becomes where the town in the future does not need that building, seems we have numerous people who are homeless. I'm just wondering if possibly that's something that could be looked at. It's warm and dry. It's not palace, but it's better than in a snowbank in January. Just a thought. Did I mention the sign at Highway 10 that you are talking about in Riddell Road? Because I'm wondering with the number of vehicles that go past there every day continuously, would it be a good idea to have a sign there for people to read while they're trying to maneuver traffic? I'm not saying it's not, I'm not saying it is. I'm wondering if anyone's talked to the police, that's what I'm wondering.
Well, the MTO controls that intersection, and it'll be the MTO that decides whether something like that can be installed. There's been some preliminary discussions, and because the messaging is metered, you can't, it's not a video message, it's not active. Likely they would allow it to happen there. But again, we're going to, I think, discuss where the best location for a sign like that would be. And in my opinion, it's further up the road, further south. But anyway, we'll have further discussions on that. So, Mr. Kidd, we're going to wrap her up. So let's have one more from you, and then if you
don't forget, I got one more and then my 2 comments. They're short and sweet, and you will love
carry
them.
on, sir.
Thank you. Bylaw officer, point 5.
Yeah.
I think this town should really look at someone available on off
hours.
Hours.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's time that was looked at, I believe. Now then, just listening tonight, listening to council and listening to staff, there's been two really important comments made. And they're both pertain to a future vote in my mind that is coming up, a very important vote. One was made, cheaper is not always better. Then there was another one from staff. Spend more upfront and save more over the years. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say.
Mr. Kidd? Thank you. Mr. Taylor, one more comment, sir?
I just wanted to comment on two things that Mr. Kidd said. First, I can't imagine anybody giving him an aggressive hand gesture, so I don't know where that would come from. And number two is, Mr. Kidd is absolutely right about the sidewalks. That was a huge issue at the time. We did look at crazy things like only plowing one side of the street to save money, that sort of thing. And I just wanted to suggest, my perspective is that I have no interest in bringing this back up again. Like, we went through 6 ways to Sunday. I think we can look at different things that may be an add-on, but Orangeville citizens view this as divine right to have this service, and I don't think we need to revisit it. So I just wanted to offer that to Mr. Kidd and give the rest of the group a perspective on what was happening at that time.
On that point, can I ask one more question, Mr. Jones? So we're the subject of slip and fall claims from time to time. Is our insurance company happy that we're doing the sidewalk clearance, and does that help us with respect to insurance claims on slip and fall? Mr. Jones.
Yes, Your Worship. The province did update the minimum maintenance standards for maintaining highways in 2018, and I've talked a little bit about it in the report that you received this evening. And in it, for the first time, it identified sidewalk maintenance. The whole reason why they created a regulation on minimum maintenance standards was to try and minimize the liability that municipalities faced as a result of maintaining their roads and now their sidewalks. The minimum maintenance standards set a standard for the maintaining of sidewalks. Certainly, we have our own policy, which is attached to the report tonight, and that policy identifies the level of service that the town of Orangeville provides. We have discussed this matter with town legal counsel, and the answer that we've got is that if the town has a policy and it adheres to its policy, that we have a very strong defense. Obviously, when something is before the courts, there are no guarantees, but we would have a strong defense as long as we are maintaining our sidewalks in accordance with our policy.
Right, thank you. And so, new business. Anybody have any new business? I'm sorry, Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Throughout the evening tonight, I don't know if the people at home got to hear, but we were subject to some wonderful musical renditions above us. Yes. So with that being said, I just wanted to point out that Theatre Orangeville's production of Little Women is starting on Friday, and it runs right through to December 22nd. So get to the box office, buy your tickets. It's going to be awesome. If it's any indication of the music we got to hear today, I think it's going to be fantastic.
Yes, thank you for that. Anybody else wish to weigh in on new business? Okay. Bylaws, number 11. Recommendation that the bylaws listed below be read 3 times and finally passed. A bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of Corporation of the Town of Orangeville at its regular council meeting held on November 26, 2019. May I have a motion for this? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Post. All in favor? I just want to make one more comment before we close up here. I'm very impressed with the depth of knowledge of all of our senior managers. All the questions that we ask are really answered very clearly and fully, and I'm very, very impressed with everybody that works at the town. And thank you all for your homework and being able to teach us newbies some of the way that the town is run. So I really appreciate all of what you bring to these meetings every time. Motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Taylor, sorry. Brainy. All in favor? Thank you.